Hello, my dear lore seekers, and welcome back to our quiet haven of shared stories. Settle in, perhaps dim the lights, and let the gentle currents of history carry you away from the waking world. Tonight, our journey takes us deep beneath the bustling streets of London, into the hidden heart of the British wizarding world. We explore an institution shrouded in secrecy, born from necessity and shaped by centuries of turmoil and triumph. Prepare to explore the echoing halls, the labyrinthine departments, and the long, complex history of the Ministry of Magic. Let your mind drift as we uncover its origins, its structure, and its profound impact on the lives of witches and wizards. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. Before the towering atrium and the gilded fireplaces, before the endless corridors and the clatter of interdepartmental memos, there existed a different world. A world quite literally without walls defining the magical community's place within the broader society. For centuries, witches and wizards lived in a state of precarious openness, alongside their non-magical neighbors. This was not a golden age of harmony, but rather a fragile and often dangerous coexistence. The line between the two worlds was blurred, a permeable membrane through which wonder and terror could pass with equal ease. In small villages and remote homesteads, a witch might have been a respected healer, her potions a vital part of community life. A wizard might have been a valued advisor, his knowledge of the stars and seasons sought by Muggle chieftains. But this familiarity bred not only acceptance, but also fear and suspicion. Magic, to the non-magical mind, was an unpredictable and often terrifying force, and those who wielded it were viewed with a mixture of awe and profound mistrust. This simmering tension erupted into open hostility during the great witch hunts that swept across Europe, and later the Americas, spanning from the 14th to the 18th centuries. It was an age of paranoia, where accusations were tantamount to conviction, and the fear of the supernatural drove Muggles to acts of terrible cruelty. Now, it is a point of some wizarding pride that these hunts were, for the most part, comically ineffective at catching actual, fully trained witches and wizards. A simple flame-freezing charm, a basic piece of magic, could render the fires of the stake into a pleasant, tickling sensation. The witch Gwendolen the Weird was said to have enjoyed the experience so much that she allowed herself to be caught 47 times in various disguises. But this gallows humor masked a far more sinister reality. The true victims of the witch hunts were not the powerful, but the vulnerable. The real danger lay not in the executioner's pyre, but in the mob's prejudice. Wizarding families were prone to losing their youngest members, children whose inability to control their own magic made them noticeable and utterly defenseless against Muggle witch hunters. Imagine a young child, frightened or angered, accidentally causing the teacups to rattle or the family cat to change color. To a wizarding family, this was a sign of burgeoning talent. To a suspicious muggle neighbor, it was proof of demonic influence. The story of Ariana Dumbledore, attacked by muggle boys who saw her performing magic and left traumatized for life, was a tragedy that likely played out in countless, unrecorded ways across the centuries. Furthermore, as muggles became more aware of magic, they increasingly sought to exploit it for their own ends, attempting to force witches and wizards to perform magic for them, or worse, to teach it to them. The situation was spiraling out of control. The very fabric of the wizarding community was being threatened, not by a single Dark Lord, but by the slow, grinding pressure of a world that refused to understand it. In this era, magical governance was a patchwork of local councils and informal agreements. It was fragmented, reactive, and utterly incapable of mounting a unified defense or implementing a society-wide policy. There was no central authority to protect the innocent, to regulate the use of magic, or to present a united front against a world that was growing more hostile by the day. The wizarding world was a nation without a state, a people without a shield. And as the flames of persecution rose higher, it became terrifyingly clear that without a fundamental change, their world would be consumed. Yet, even in the long centuries before the Ministry of Magic was conceived, governance of the British magical community was not entirely absent. It was, however, a far cry from the sprawling bureaucracy we know today. The longest-serving and most significant of these early ruling bodies was the Wizards' Council, with records stretching back to at least the 13th century, and likely far earlier. The council was the closest thing the wizarding world had to a central government. Its structure was archaic, a relic of a more feudal and decentralized age. Led by a figure known as the chief, or chieftainess if the role was held by a witch, the council was likely composed of powerful and respected elders, appointed from the major wizarding communities scattered across the British Isles. One can imagine them as a council of chieftains, a gathering of the wise and the influential, meeting not in a grand subterranean complex, but perhaps in a warded clearing, or the great hall of an ancient magical family's keep. It functioned as a form of primitive representative democracy, where the interests of various clans and regions were debated and negotiated. The council wielded both legislative and judicial authority. It was this body that first attempted to regulate the burgeoning sport of Quidditch, a game whose popularity was becoming a serious threat to magical secrecy. In 1362, the council banned all Quidditch matches within 50 miles of a town, a restriction they were forced to extend to 100 miles just 6 years later, as the sport's appeal continued to grow unabated. They also held summits on the classification of magical beasts and beings, a thorny issue that would continue to plague their successors for centuries. The judicial arm of the council was the Wizengamot, a high court of law that predated the council itself and would long outlive it, eventually being absorbed into the modern ministry. However, for all its history and authority, the Wizards' Council was an institution built for a different era. It was a body designed to mediate disputes between wizards, not to hide an entire civilization from the non-magical world. Its structure was too loose, its enforcement powers too limited, and its reach too inconsistent to manage the escalating crisis with the Muggles. As the witch hunts intensified, and the need for a unified, society-wide policy of concealment became a matter of survival, the Council's failings became starkly apparent. It could pass edicts, but it lacked the complex machinery of state, the departments, the officers, the Aurors, to enforce them consistently across the land. The world was changing, and the old ways were no longer enough. The Wizards' Council, for all its ancient wisdom, was an institution whose time was coming to an end. By the late 17th century, the wizarding world stood at a precipice. The relationship with the Muggle world had deteriorated beyond repair. The constant threat of persecution, the danger to magical children, and the increasing attempts by Muggles to exploit magic for their own gain had created an intolerable situation. The debate that raged within the magical community was stark and desperate. Should they declare war on the Muggles, using their superior power to subjugate them once and for all? Or should they retreat, vanishing from the world entirely? The militants argued for war, confident in their magical superiority. But others, like Ralston Potter, a member of the Wizengamot from 1612 to 1652, argued passionately for secrecy, recognizing the catastrophic potential of an all-out conflict between the two worlds. The sheer number of Muggles, and the certainty that some wizards, particularly Muggle-borns, would side with their non-magical families, made the outcome of such a war terrifyingly uncertain. In the end, the path of discretion was chosen. In a monumental summit, the International Confederation of Wizards, a body representing magical governments from across the globe, convened to address the crisis. The discussions were long and arduous, with the debate over the rights and concealment of magical creatures alone lasting for 7 weeks and involving delegations of goblins, centaurs, and merpeople. The result of this historic summit was the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, signed in 1689 and put into full effect in 1692. It was a global accord that mandated the complete and total concealment of the magical world from non-magical society. This was an act of breathtaking ambition, a decision to hide an entire civilization in plain sight. It was the Great Retreat, a moment when the wizarding world turned its back on the Muggle world and chose to live behind a veil of secrecy. But this decision created an unprecedented logistical and legal challenge. How does one enforce such a statute? How do you regulate an entire community in hiding, ensuring that no stray spell, no escaped magical creature, no careless conversation ever pierces the veil. The task was monumental. It required a government of immense size, complexity, and organization. It needed a structure that could support, regulate, and communicate with a hidden populace. A government that could manage everything from international relations to the thickness of cauldron bottoms, all while remaining utterly invisible. The old Wizards' Council, with its informal structure and limited powers, was simply not fit for this new reality. The Statute of Secrecy had created a problem that only a new kind of government could solve. A Ministry of Magic was no longer a matter of debate. It had become an absolute necessity. The very act of hiding created the need for the institution that would spend the next 3 centuries perfecting the art of secrecy. The 15 years following the enactment of the International Statute of Secrecy were a period of profound and chaotic transition. The wizarding community, accustomed to centuries of at least partial openness, was now forced into a life of concealment. It was a time of fear, confusion, and even rebellion, as many chafed under the new restrictions. The Wizards' Council, the governing body of old, struggled to manage the immense task of enforcing the New World Order, its archaic structure buckling under the strain. It was clear that a new, more powerful, and more organized form of government was needed. And so, in the year 1707, the British Ministry of Magic was formally established. The man chosen to lead this new institution, the very first to hold the title of Minister for Magic, was Ulick Gamp. Gamp was not a revolutionary, but a seasoned politician, the former head of the Wizengamot, wizarding Britain's High Court of Law. He was seen as a steady hand, a man capable of navigating the treacherous political waters of this new era. His task was immense: to police a fractious and frightened community, and to build, from the ground up, a governmental structure capable of enforcing the greatest secret in history. Gamp's tenure, which lasted from 1707 to 1718, was defined by this foundational work. He understood that the ministry's primary purpose was the enforcement of the Statute of Secrecy, and to that end, he created the institution that would become the very cornerstone of the new government. His greatest and most enduring legacy was the establishment of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This department was to be the shield and sword of the wizarding world, the body responsible for hunting down those who broke the new laws, for dealing with magical catastrophes, and for ensuring that the veil of secrecy remained intact. With the creation of the DMLE, the modern Ministry of Magic truly began to take shape, not as a council of elders, but as a functioning state with the power to police its citizens and protect its existence. The founding of the ministry, however, did not magically solve the deep-seated divisions within the wizarding community. The first century of its existence was a turbulent period, defined by an ideological struggle over the very soul of their newly hidden society. The central conflict, which would echo down the centuries and lay the groundwork for future Dark Lords, was the question of Muggles. Having retreated from the Muggle world, should they now treat it with contempt, or with a desire for peaceful coexistence? This question defined the tenures of the early ministers for magic. Ulick Gomp's successor, Damocles Roll, who served from 1718 to 1726, was elected on a fiercely anti-Muggle platform. His policies were so extreme and antagonistic that he was eventually censured by the International Confederation of Wizards and forced to step down. It was during Rowl's tenure that the fortress of Azkaban, long a place of dark repute, was established as the official wizarding prison, ignoring the warnings of experts about the soul-devouring dementors that infested the island. Rowle began sending prisoners there, instituting a reign of terror that would last for nearly 300 years. Rowle was followed by Perseus Parkinson, who served from 1726 to 1733 and continued the anti-Muggle sentiment. Parkinson went so far as to attempt to pass a bill making it illegal for a witch or wizard to marry a Muggle. However, he had misread the public mood. The wizarding community, weary of conflict and prejudice, desired peace. Parkinson was voted out at the first opportunity. This shift in public opinion brought to power Eldritch Diggory, a popular and far more progressive minister who held office from 1733 to 1747. Diggory broke decisively with the anti-Muggle policies of his predecessors. His most significant achievement was the establishment of the first formal Auror recruitment program, creating an elite force of dark wizard catchers to protect the community from internal threats. His promising tenure was cut short when he died in office from a case of dragonpox. The middle of the century was marked by crisis and instability. Diggory's successors, the likable but inept Albert Boot and the short-lived Basil Flack, both presided over disastrously mismanaged goblin and werewolf rebellions, and both were forced to resign in disgrace in 1752. This period of turmoil was finally brought to an end by Hephaestus Gore, one of the earliest Aurors trained under Diggory's program. Gore, who served from 1752 to 1770, successfully put down the rebellions that had toppled his predecessors. However, his legacy is a mixed one. While a strong leader, his refusal to even contemplate rehabilitation programs for werewolves is seen by many historians as a key factor in the escalation of werewolf attacks in the years that followed. He also renovated and reinforced the prison of Azkaban, solidifying its grim place in the wizarding world. The latter part of the 18th century saw the ministry mature. Maximilian Crowdy, a charismatic leader who served from 1770 to 1781, took a firm stance against pure-blood extremism, rooting out several groups that were planning attacks on Muggles. His mysterious death in office remains the subject of conspiracy theories to this day. He was succeeded by a series of ministers who navigated the complex relationship with the Muggle world, including Porteous Knatchbull, who was confidentially consulted by the Muggle Prime Minister on the mental instability of King George III. The century closed with the election of Artemisia Lufkin, the first female minister for magic, who served from 1798 to 1811. A forward-thinking leader, Lufkin's greatest achievement was the founding of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, a testament to her vision of a wizarding world that, while hidden, was not entirely isolated. This first century was a crucible, forging the ministry into the institution it would become, its policies forever swinging between the poles of fear-driven isolation and the hope for a more connected world. To house this new, sprawling government, a location was chosen that was both practical and deeply symbolic. The Ministry of Magic headquarters was established deep underground, directly beneath Whitehall in the very heart of Muggle London. This choice was a powerful statement of intent. The wizarding world would exist parallel to the Muggle world, hidden but ever present, a secret kingdom buried beneath the feet of its oblivious neighbors. The site itself was steeped in history, located on the grounds of the old Palace of Whitehall, the former residence of English monarchs. Access to this hidden world was, by necessity, a masterpiece of magical concealment. The public entrance for visitors was disguised as a derelict red telephone box, standing on a dingy, forgotten street, surrounded by shabby offices and graffiti-covered walls. To enter, a visitor would step inside and dial the number 62442, spelling out the word magic on the old rotary dial. A cool female voice would emanate not from the receiver, but from the air itself, requesting the visitor's name and business. Upon stating their purpose, a silver badge would dispense from the coin return slot, and the entire telephone box would descend like a lift, plunging the visitor deep beneath the city streets. This descent would end in the magnificent Atrium, the grand entrance hall of the Ministry, located on level 8. It was a vast, long hall designed to impress and perhaps intimidate. The floors were of highly polished dark wood, reflecting the light like still water. The ceiling was a deep peacock blue, across which golden symbols moved and shifted in intricate, ever-changing patterns. Lining both sides of the hall were rows of gilded fireplaces, constantly roaring with green flames, as witches and wizards arrived and departed via the Flu network. Halfway down this impressive hall stood the Fountain of Magical Brethren. In its original form, before its later corruption under Voldemort's regime, it was a beautiful golden sculpture. It depicted a noble-looking wizard and a beautiful witch standing with their arms outstretched, alongside a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf, all gazing adoringly up at the magical couple. Water spouted from the tips of the wizard's wands, the point of the centaur's arrow, the peak of the goblin's hat, and from each of the house elf's ears. The statue was intended to symbolize the supposed harmony between the different magical races, a beautiful and aspirational ideal that, as the constant goblin rebellions and the marginalization of other beings would attest, was far from the reality of wizarding society. At the far end of the atrium, golden gates led to a smaller hall containing the lifts that provided access to the ministry's many levels, the gateways to the machinery of government hidden deep in the earth. And so, this great and sprawling institution was born, a subterranean fortress of bureaucracy built to guard a single, monumental secret. But to truly understand its power, its reach, and its many contradictions, we must walk its halls. We must step into the golden lifts of the atrium and descend, level by level, into the heart of the machine, exploring the function and history of each of its 7 major departments. Our first stop is Level 2, home to the largest, oldest, and most powerful arm of the Ministry, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Founded by the very first minister, Wizengamot, the DMLE, as it's often known, is the bedrock upon which the entire ministry is built. It is a vast and multifaceted organization, a combination of police force, high court, and intelligence agency. All other departments, with the notable and mysterious exception of the Department of Mysteries, are in some way answerable to it, a testament to its central importance. Its corridors are a hub of activity, where the most vital and often most dangerous work of the ministry is carried out. At the heart of the DMLE lies the Auror Office, also known as Auror Headquarters. This is the home of the wizarding world's elite, a highly trained cadre of dark wizard catchers who operate as a combination of special agents and intelligence officers. The Auror recruitment program was first established in the 1730s by the progressive minister Eldritch Diggory, who recognized the need for a specialized force to combat the growing threat of dark magic. The office itself is described as an open-plan series of cubicles, a bustling and often chaotic space where each Auror personalizes their small area with pictures of their families, maps of wanted dark wizards, and clippings of news stories related to their cases. Becoming an Auror is an incredibly difficult undertaking. The academic requirements alone are daunting, demanding a minimum of 5 NEWTS, with grades no lower than exceeds expectations in challenging subjects like potions, transfiguration, and defense against the dark arts. Those who meet these standards must then pass a series of stringent character and aptitude tests, followed by a grueling 3-year training program that assesses their skills in practical defense, stealth, concealment, and magical combat under intense pressure. The history of the Aurors is a history of the wizarding world's greatest conflicts. During the First Wizarding War, under the ruthless leadership of DMLE head Barty Crouch Sr., Aurors were granted the authority to use the unforgivable curses against Death Eaters, a controversial policy that demonstrated the desperation of the times. Many of the most famous names in recent wizarding history have been Aurors. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody was a legend in his time, a scarred and grizzled veteran responsible for filling half the cells in Azkaban. Frank and Alice Longbottom were two of the finest Aurors of their generation before they were tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange. Nymphadora Tonks and Kingsley Shacklebolt were key members of the Order of the Phoenix, working as spies within the Ministry itself. After the final defeat of Lord Voldemort, both Harry Potter and Ron Weasley joined the Auror Office, with Harry eventually rising to become the youngest head of the Auror Office in history at the age of just 26. Also housed on Level 2 are the Wizengamot Administration Services, the bureaucratic arm that supports the Wizarding High Court. The Wizengamot itself is an ancient institution, far older than the Ministry. Records show it was active as early as 1544, and it served as the judicial body for the Old Wizards' Council before being absorbed into the newly formed DMLE in 1707. It is a unique body, functioning as both Britain's High Court of Law and its Parliament, holding both judicial and legislative power. While its administrative offices are on Level 2, its trials are held deep in the dungeons on Level 10, in a grim, stone-walled courtroom where the accused sits in a chained chair in the center, surrounded by the high benches of the 50 or so members of the court. These members are distinguished by their elaborate, plum-colored robes embroidered with a silver dabu on the chest. The court is presided over by the Chief Warlock, a prestigious position once held by Albus Dumbledore. Full trials before the entire Wizengamot are a rare and serious affair, typically reserved for the most heinous crimes, such as the trials of the Death Eaters after the First Wizarding War. The decision to subject Harry Potter to a full criminal trial for a simple case of underage magic was a gross abuse of power by Cornelius Fudge, a politically motivated act designed to discredit and silence him. It was a clear sign of the corruption that had begun to fester at the heart of the Ministry's justice system. One of the most crucial and often most frustrating divisions of the DMLE is the improper use of Magic Office. This office is the primary enforcer of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery. Its main tool is the Trace, a magical charm placed upon all young witches and wizards that alerts the Ministry whenever magic is performed in their vicinity. When the trace is triggered, the office is notified of the spell used, the location, and the time, and a warning letter is typically dispatched to the offender. However, the trace is a notoriously imperfect system. Its greatest flaw is its inability to determine who cast the spell. It can only detect that magic was performed near an underage wizard. This makes the law almost completely unenforceable in wizarding households, where any magical activity could be attributed to the parents or older siblings. The Ministry simply presumes that any magic detected in a magical home is the work of an adult, while any magic in a Muggle home is the work of the underage resident. This creates a glaring double standard, where Muggle-borns like Harry Potter are policed with an oppressive strictness that children from magical families like the Weasleys simply do not experience. Tucked away in a small, cramped office on level 2 is the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. Though often considered the most boring and least glamorous posting in the Ministry, its function is vital to upholding the Statute of Secrecy. This office is responsible for preventing enchanted Muggle objects from re-entering the non-magical world, where they could cause chaos and expose the wizarding community. They deal with everything from regurgitating toilets to shrinking keys and biting tea kettles. For many years, this tiny department was headed by Arthur Weasley, whose fascination with Muggles was both a professional asset and a personal liability. He famously drafted the very law he was meant to enforce with a specific loophole that allowed him to continue tinkering with his Ford Anglia on the grounds that he had no intention of flying it. The office itself is a testament to its work, a cluttered space filled with confiscated items like a hiccoughing toaster and a pair of leather gloves that endlessly twiddle their thumbs. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement is a vast entity, and several other smaller offices operate under its purview. The Magical Law Enforcement Squad consists of hit witches and wizards, a magical equivalent of a SWAT team, dispatched to handle dangerous criminals and high-risk situations that don't necessarily involve dark magic. Following the public return of Lord Voldemort, Minister Rufus Granger created the office for the detection and confiscation of counterfeit, defensive spells and protective objects. This new division was tasked with cracking down on the flood of fake protective charms and potions that charlatans were selling to a frightened public. In a significant promotion, Arthur Weasley was made the head of this new office, with a staff of 10 reporting to him. Descending now to level 3, we find the offices of the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. If the DMLE is the police force, this department is the Wizarding World's emergency services, the first responders who leap into action whenever magic goes wrong and threatens to breach the Statute of Secrecy. Their offices are described as looking more like a comfortable lounge than a government workplace, a place where teams wait on standby, ready to be dispatched at a moment's notice via a dedicated bank of Floo network fireplaces and port keys. The front line of this department is the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. These are the teams sent out to reverse the effects of magical mishaps, whether it's a young witch who has accidentally inflated her aunt, a wizard who has splinched himself during a failed apparition attempt, or any other of 1,000 possible magical accidents. They are the magical cleanup crew, tasked with restoring normality before Muggles can become too aware that something is amiss. Perhaps the most secretive and essential division on this level is Obliviator Headquarters. The Obliviators are a highly specialized and rigorously trained group of wizards and witches whose sole job is the performance of memory charms. When a Muggle witnesses an undeniable act of magic, a dragon flying overhead, a duel in a public square, or a magical creature on the loose, it is the Obliviators who are sent in to erase or modify their memories. They are the silent guardians of the Statute of Secrecy, their work ensuring that the line between the two worlds remains firmly drawn. The memory charm, Obliviate, is their primary tool, a delicate and difficult piece of magic that, when performed correctly, leaves the Muggle with nothing more than a vague sense of unease and a gap in their memory that they quickly fill with a more mundane explanation. Sometimes, however, a magical incident is too large, too public, or too strange to be covered up simply by modifying a few memories. When the Loch Ness Monster is spotted by dozens of tourists, or when giants are seen uprooting trees in the West Country, a more comprehensive explanation is required. This is the responsibility of the Muggle-worthy Excuse Committee. This committee works in concert with the Muggle Prime Minister's office to concoct plausible, non-magical explanations for magical events. They are the master storytellers of the ministry, weaving tales of weather balloons, gas pipe explosions, and elaborate hoaxes to satisfy the curiosity of the Muggle press and public, preserving the secret world through carefully crafted lies. Our journey continues down to Level 4, home to the second largest department in the ministry, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. This sprawling department is responsible for overseeing, regulating, and concealing every magical creature in Britain, from the most benign flobberworm to the most formidable dragon. The department's structure is based on a fundamental and deeply contentious set of definitions established in 1811 by the popular Minister for Magic, Grogan Stump. He decreed that all known creatures would be classified into one of three categories: beast, being, or spirit. The definition of a being was any creature that has sufficient intelligence to understand the laws of the magical community and to bear part of the responsibility in shaping those laws. Creatures that did not meet this standard were classified as beasts, while ghosts and poltergeists were given their own category of spirits. This seemingly simple classification system was immediately mired in politics and prejudice. The most intelligent and proud races, the centaurs and the merpeople, were outraged at having to share being status with creatures they considered monstrous, such as hags and vampires. In protest, they demanded to be reclassified as beasts, and chose to govern their own affairs, separate from the ministry. This act of defiance left the ministry in an awkward position, with a centaur liaison office that no centaur has ever deigned to use, a posting that has since become a ministry euphemism for being fired. The classification of werewolves remains a source of confusion. They are considered beings in their human form, but are reclassified as beasts during their monthly transformation, a bureaucratic distinction that reflects the wizarding world's deep-seated prejudice against them. The Beast Division is the largest of the three, containing a host of sub-offices. Alongside the famously empty Centaur Liaison Office, there is the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, a powerful body that holds the power of life and death over creatures deemed a threat, as was seen in the case of the hippogriff Buckbeak. Other offices include the Dragon Research and Restraint Bureau, the Werewolf Registry, and the Werewolf Capture Unit, which are tasked with monitoring and controlling these dangerous populations. The Ghoul Task Force is responsible for removing ghouls from wizarding homes that have passed into Muggle ownership, a small but necessary part of maintaining secrecy. The Being Division is dominated by the perpetually fraught relationship between wizards and other intelligent races. The Goblin Liaison Office is in a state of near-constant, tense negotiation with the Goblin Nation. Goblins, who run the wizarding economy through Gringotts Bank, deeply resent the ministry law that forbids them from carrying wands, a key point of contention that has fueled centuries of rebellions and mistrust. The office is tasked with smoothing over these relations, a difficult and often thankless job. The Being Division also contains the Office for House Elf Relocation, a small office that deals with the welfare and reassignment of house elves when their families die out. Moving to level 5, we find the Department of International Magical Cooperation, the Wizarding World's Diplomatic Corps. Founded around 1805 by the first female Minister for Magic, Artemisia Lufkin, this department is responsible for maintaining relationships with magical governments in other countries. Its responsibilities are broad, covering everything from negotiating international magical law to setting trade standards. A seemingly mundane but surprisingly contentious part of their job involves creating regulations for things like the standardized thickness of cauldron bottoms, a subject Percy Weasley once wrote a lengthy report on. The department plays a crucial role in organizing major international events, working closely with the Department of Magical Games and Sports to host the Triwizard Tournament and the Quidditch World Cup. The department itself is split into 3 main divisions: the International Magical Trading Standards Body, which oversees commerce; the International Magical Office of Law, which interprets and helps enforce international treaties; and the British seats of the International Confederation of Wizards, which represents Britain in the Global Wizarding Assembly. For many years, this department was headed by the formidable Barty Crouch Sr., a man whose rigid adherence to rules and fluency in over 200 languages made him a natural, if intimidating, diplomat. Descending to level 6, we arrive at the Department of Magical Transportation, the division responsible for regulating all the magical ways witches and wizards get from place to place. The Flu Network Authority is one of its most important divisions. It manages the vast, invisible network of magically connected fireplaces that crisscross the country, allowing for instantaneous travel. The authority controls which fireplaces are connected to the network and regulates the distribution of the essential flu powder. Connecting a Muggle fireplace to the network is a serious breach of regulations. though it is a rule that Arthur Weasley was known to have bent on occasion. The Broom Regulatory Control Office oversees the safety standards and manufacturing of flying broomsticks, ensuring that new models are airworthy and not dangerously cursed. The Portkey Office regulates the creation and use of portkeys, innocuous objects enchanted to transport anyone who touches them to a predetermined destination at a specific time. Due to their potential for misuse, unauthorized portkeys are highly illegal. Finally, the Apparition Test Center is responsible for licensing one of the most difficult and dangerous forms of magical travel. Apparition, the art of teleporting from one place to another at will, requires immense concentration. A lapse in focus can lead to splinching, the horrific magical accident where a part of the witch or wizard's body is left behind. To prevent this, the test center administers a rigorous practical exam and offers a 12-week course to students who are of age, teaching them the 3 crucial principles: destination, determination, and deliberation. Level 7 is dedicated to more leisurely pursuits, housing the Department of Magical Games and Sports. While seemingly less critical than law enforcement or international cooperation, this department's primary role is still tied to the Statute of Secrecy, regulating wizarding sports to ensure they remain hidden from Muggle eyes. There is a notable contradiction in the historical record regarding its founding. Some sources claim it was established in 1750, while others attribute its creation to Minister Grogan Stump in the 1810s. It is possible that Stump significantly reformed an earlier, less effective version of the department. The department's main offices include the British and Irish Quidditch League headquarters, the governing body for the 13 professional teams that make up the league. It also houses the official Gobstones Club, which oversees the less popular but still cherished game of gobstones, a magical version of marbles where the stones squirt a foul-smelling liquid at the loser. Perhaps the most curiously named division on this level is the ludicrous Patents Office. While its name might suggest a place for frivolous inventions, its location within the Department of Magical Games and Sports, combined with the etymology of the word ludicrous from the Latin ludere, meaning to play, suggests its true purpose. It is likely the office responsible for patenting magical sporting equipment like the Horton Keach breaking charm for broomsticks, as well as joke items such as those developed by Weasley's wizard wheezes. Our final stop takes us deep into the Ministry, past the Atrium, to the lowest accessible level, Level 9, the home of the Department of Mysteries. This is the most secret department in the entire Ministry, a place of deep research into the most profound and fundamental forces of existence. The witches and wizards who work here are known only as unspeakables, bound by magical oaths never to discuss their work with anyone. The department is accessed through a single plain black door at the end of a bare corridor, which leads into a circular entrance chamber with 12 identical, handleless doors. When the entrance door closes, the room rotates, disorienting visitors and making it impossible to know which door leads where. Each of these doors opens into a different chamber, each dedicated to the study of a single great mystery. The brain room is a long rectangular chamber containing a large glass tank filled with a green potion, in which pearly white brains float serenely. These are not inert specimens. If removed from the tank, they can attack with long, trailing streamers of pure thought, which can leave deep physical and mental scars. The unspeakables here study the very nature of consciousness and thought. The death chamber is a vast, tiered stone amphitheater resembling an ancient courtroom. In the center, on a raised dais, stands an ancient, crumbling stone archway hung with a tattered, fluttering black veil. This veil is no mere decoration. It is a one-way portal, a permanent barrier between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Those who have experienced loss can hear the faint whispers of the dead from beyond the veil, and anyone who passes through it is gone forever. It was here that Sirius Black met his tragic end. The Hall of Prophecy is an immense, cold chamber filled with towering shelves stretching as far as the eye can see. These shelves hold countless spinning glass orbs, each one a magical record of a prophecy made by a seer. Each prophecy is protected by powerful enchantments, ensuring that it can only be retrieved by the person to whom it pertains. The Love Chamber is a room that is always kept locked, its entrance resisting all magical and physical attempts to open it. According to Albus Dumbledore, this room contains a force more wonderful and more terrible than death, than human intelligence, than forces of nature. It is where the unspeakables study the power of love. It is believed that at its center lies a great fountain or well, containing a love potion of unimaginable power, a force so potent and dangerous that the room must remain permanently sealed. The space chamber is a dark, silent room where glowing models of the planets and their moons float in the darkness, suspended in their orbits by unseen forces. It is here that the unspeakables conduct their research into the mysteries of space, gravity, and the cosmos. Finally, the Time Room is a chamber filled with the dazzling, diamond-sparkling light of magic and the relentless ticking of thousands of clocks of every shape and size. This room is dedicated to the study of time itself. It houses the Ministry's entire stock of time-turners, powerful devices that allow for limited travel into the past. At the far end of the room stands a large crystal bell jar, within which a tiny hummingbird is trapped in an endless loop, hatching from an egg, growing to maturity, aging, and then reverting to an egg to begin the cycle anew, a living demonstration of time's relentless and cyclical nature. The very structure of the Ministry serves as a powerful metaphor for its priorities. the public-facing, bureaucratic functions, law, transportation, sports, are situated on the upper levels, visible and accessible. But the foundational concepts of magic, the existential forces of love, time, and death that truly govern their world, are hidden away in the deepest basement, unacknowledged and poorly understood by the politicians who work above. This physical and intellectual disconnect between the administration of magic and the understanding of its deepest truths reveals a fundamental flaw in the ministry's design, a blind spot that would prove catastrophic when a wizard who sought to master those very forces rose to power. The 11-year conflict known as the First Wizarding War was the Ministry of Magic's first true test in the modern era, and it was a test that brought the institution to the brink of collapse. The war officially began in 1970 as Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters moved from covert acts of terror to open warfare against the magical community. The Ministry's initial response was characterized by weakness and incompetence. The Minister for Magic at the time, Eugenia Jenkins, who held office from 1968 to 1975, was unable to handle the escalating violence and the pure blood riots that Voldemort's ideology had stoked. She was eventually removed from power, seen as too soft to combat the growing threat. Her successor, Harold Mincham, who served from 1975 to 1980, took a harder line, greatly increasing the number of Dementors at Azkaban. But he, too, failed to halt the Death Eaters' advance. Like Jenkins, he was eventually forced from office, another political casualty of a war the Ministry was losing. During this period of weak political leadership, the real power within the Ministry was concentrated in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement under its formidable head, Bartemius Crouch Sr. Crouch was a man of immense ambition and ruthless efficiency. He believed in fighting fire with fire. As the war intensified and fear gripped the wizarding world, Crouch authorized the Aurors to use the unforgivable curses against suspected Death Eaters. He sanctioned kill-on-sight orders and sent suspects to Azkaban without the formality of a trial. His methods were brutal, and many argued that he became as cruel as the dark wizards he fought. But they were undeniably effective. He gained immense popularity and was widely tipped to be the next Minister for Magic. However, Crouch's meteoric rise came to a stunning and tragic end. His own son, Barty Crouch Jr., was captured alongside the Lestranges for the brutal torture of the Aurors, Frank, and Alice Longbottom. In a packed courtroom, Crouch Sr. publicly disowned his son and sentenced him to a life sentence in Azkaban. The act was meant to demonstrate his unwavering commitment to justice, but the public saw it as a sign of a man whose ambition had destroyed his own family. His popularity plummeted overnight, and his career was ruined. The fall of Barty Crouch Sr. was a powerful symbol of the war's cost, revealing how deeply Voldemort's corruption had penetrated even the most powerful wizarding families, and how the Ministry's own brutal tactics had failed to protect it from rotting from within. Following Voldemort's sudden and mysterious disappearance in 1981, the wizarding world entered a period of fragile peace. The minister who oversaw this transition was Millicent Bagnold, who served from 1980 until 1990. Her tenure was defined by the immediate aftermath of the war, rounding up and trying the remaining Death Eaters, and dealing with the widespread, joyous, and often chaotic celebrations that frequently breached the Statute of Secrecy. When called before the International Confederation of Wizards to account for these breaches, she famously and defiantly declared, "I assert our inalienable right to party." When Bagnold retired in 1990, the wizarding community was looking for a different kind of leader. The trauma of the war was still fresh, and the ruthless authoritarianism of figures like Barty Crouch Sr. had left a bad taste. The public wanted stability, peace, and a return to normality. They found their man in Cornelius Fudge. Fudge was a career politician, a former junior minister in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. He was not the community's first choice. The position had been repeatedly offered to Albus Dumbledore, who turned it down, but he was seen as a safe, uncontroversial pick. Fudge's years in office were defined by this desire to maintain a peaceful status quo at all costs. He was a man who valued comfort and popularity over difficult truths. He was easily flattered and deeply influenced by those with wealth and status, most notably Lucius Malfoy, a former Death Eater who had successfully rebranded himself as a respectable and generous philanthropist. Fudge's own past experiences shaped his worldview. As a junior minister, he had been one of the first on the scene of Peter Pettigrew's apparent murder by Sirius Black, an event so horrific that it left him with nightmares for years. This deep-seated trauma made him viscerally resistant to anything that threatened to bring back the horrors of the past. This psychological weakness proved to be his and the wizarding world's undoing. When Harry Potter emerged from the Triwizard Tournament in 1995 with the news of Lord Voldemort's return, Fudge was faced with a truth he simply could not accept. To acknowledge Voldemort's return would be to plunge the world back into war, to shatter the comfortable peace he had so carefully cultivated. It was a truth so terrible that he chose to believe it was a lie. Fueled by a paranoid fear that Dumbledore was plotting to usurp his position, Fudge launched a vicious smear campaign against both Harry and Dumbledore, using his influence with the Daily Prophet to paint them as liars and lunatics. He installed his sycophantic and cruel Senior Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge at Hogwarts to act as a ministry spy and suppress any talk of Voldemort's return. Fudge's denial was a catastrophic failure of leadership, a decision born of fear, political expediency, and personal trauma, and it gave Lord Voldemort a full year to rebuild his forces, gather his followers and infiltrate the ministry, all while the government that was meant to protect its people insisted there was no danger at all. When Lord Voldemort appeared in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic at the end of the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, Fudge could no longer deny the truth. His political career was destroyed in an instant. He was sacked in disgrace and replaced in the summer of 1996 by Rufus Scrimgeour. Scrimgeour was a very different man from Fudge. A former head of the Auror Office, he was a battle-hardened veteran with the look of an old lion. He was a man of action who took the threat of Voldemort with the utmost seriousness. However, despite his experience, he was still a politician. He was deeply concerned with the ministry's public image and the morale of the wizarding populace. He became obsessed with the idea of using Harry Potter, now hailed as the Chosen One, as a mascot for the ministry, a symbol of hope and resistance. He repeatedly tried to pressure Harry into being seen publicly supporting the ministry, a tactic Harry angrily rejected, believing the ministry had not yet earned his trust. While Scrimgeour was fighting the war in public, Voldemort was fighting it in the shadows. The ministry that Scrimgeour inherited was already rotten from within, hollowed out by Fudge's year of denial and ripe for infiltration. The end came not with a bang, but with a whisper. On August 1st, 1997, the Ministry of Magic fell in a silent coup. There was no grand battle in the Atrium, no open invasion. Voldemort's victory was achieved through stealth and the Imperious Curse. Over the preceding weeks, Death Eaters had systematically placed high-ranking ministry officials under their control. The key to their plan was Pius Thickness, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Once Yaxley succeeded in placing him under the Imperious Curse, the ministry's fate was sealed. With the head of law enforcement under their control, the Death Eaters could subjugate other department heads one by one, until Minister Scrimgeour was completely surrounded by enemies he believed to be his own people. Once isolated, Scrimgeour was captured, brutally tortured for information on Harry Potter's whereabouts, and then murdered. To his eternal credit, he died without betraying Harry's location. The official story put out by the now controlled ministry was that Scrimgeour had resigned. He was replaced by the Imperious Pius Thickness, who became Voldemort's puppet minister. With the ministry firmly under his control, Voldemort began to institutionalize his pure blood ideology. The most terrifying instrument of this new regime was the Muggle-born Registration Commission, headed by the gleefully cruel Dolores Umbridge. A new, twisted legal theory was promoted, that Muggle-borns had no magical ancestry, and therefore could only have acquired their magic by theft or force from a real witch or wizard. Muggle-borns were rounded up, forced to register, and subjected to sham trials in the dungeons of the ministry, with dementors hovering over them as a form of psychological torture. They were interrogated, stripped of their wands, and imprisoned in Azkaban for the crime of being born. The Ministry's collapse was not a sudden military defeat, but the final, inevitable outcome of its own deepest flaws. The pure-blood prejudice that Minister Perseus Parkinson had tried to legislate in the 1720s had now become the law of the land. Voldemort had not so much conquered the Ministry as he had simply taken hold of the levers of power and turned its own latent prejudices into a machine of state-sanctioned terror. The fall of Lord Voldemort at the Battle of Hogwarts on May 2nd, 1998, left the wizarding world in a state of shock and disarray. The Ministry of Magic, which had been the instrument of Voldemort's tyranny, was shattered and leaderless. In the immediate power vacuum, a new leader emerged, one who commanded respect and had proven his courage and integrity throughout the war, Kingsley Shacklebolt. A highly capable Auror and a key member of the Order of the Phoenix, Kingsley had resisted Voldemort's regime from within and without, even broadcasting the pirate radio show Potter Watch to keep hope alive. In the aftermath of the battle, he was named Caretaker Minister for Magic, a temporary appointment that was soon made permanent by a grateful wizarding community. Kingsley's first priority was to restore order and justice. He immediately set about rounding up the remaining Death Eaters and Voldemort's supporters who had fled the battle. In this task, he was aided by Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, who, despite not having completed their final year at Hogwarts, were invited to join the Auror Department, their experience in fighting Voldemort being deemed more valuable than any formal qualification. But Kingsley's vision went far beyond simply apprehending criminals. He sought to fundamentally reform the Ministry, to purge it of the corruption, prejudice, and incompetence that had allowed it to fall in the first place. He was an incorruptible reformer, and his changes were swift and profound. His most significant act was to remove the Dementors from their role as the guards of Azkaban, ending a barbaric and unreliable practice that had lasted for nearly 3 centuries. Working closely with Harry, who was eventually promoted to head of the Auror Department, and Hermione Granger, who took a high-ranking position within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Kingsley began the arduous process of dismantling the pro-pure blood laws that had poisoned the Ministry for generations. He led the wizarding world into a new era of peace, tolerance, and competence. His calm and confident leadership healing the deep wounds left by the war. The reforms initiated by Kingsley Shacklebolt laid the foundation for the modern Ministry of Magic. After a long and successful tenure, during which he revolutionized the institution, he eventually stepped down. His successor marked the ultimate symbol of the wizarding world's transformation, Hermione Granger. The ascension of a Muggle-born witch to the highest office in the land represented the final and definitive rejection of the pure-blood ideology that had caused so much suffering. The very person who, under the previous regime, would have been hunted, interrogated, and imprisoned for the crime of her birth, now led the government. It was a testament to the profound changes that had taken place, a sign that the Ministry was no longer defined by its fear of the outside world or its internal prejudices. Under the leadership of figures like Kingsley and Hermione, the Ministry of Magic was finally able to evolve. It moved beyond its origins as an institution, founded on the trauma of secrecy and control, and began to strive towards becoming a true instrument of justice, equality, and cooperation for all members of the magical community. Its long, dark, and often troubled history had finally led it into the light. The story of the Ministry of Magic is indeed a long and winding one, a tale filled with fear and courage, corruption and reform. It acts as a mirror held up to the wizarding world itself, reflecting its greatest strengths alongside its most profound weaknesses. From its desperate beginnings as a shield against a hostile world, through centuries of internal strife, to its fall into darkness and its ultimate rebirth, it serves as a potent reminder that institutions are only ever as strong, as just, and as wise as the individuals who lead them and work within their halls. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the hidden corridors of power tonight. May your dreams be filled with intriguing histories and your sleep sound and peaceful. Until our next story.